Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Tom DeLuca of Cushman and Wakefield. Tom's a senior director of the company, specializes in the Long Island industrial real estate sector. Tom's clients range from local users all the way through some of the largest institutional investors in the country. Well, let's kick it off. Tom, how did you get started working at Cushman?
Actually, a family friend of mine was working at the Cushman and Wakefield Long Island office and was in college at the time, didn't know really what I wanted to do for work. He had mentioned Cushman and Wakefield and what he did on a daily basis and was intriguing to me. So, I took a real estate course at Hofstra before I graduated. He put me in touch with my team and mentor, Frank Frizzalone, who I've been working with ever since. And it's been a great relationship and partnership.
Sounds good. And, we're on Long Island right now. Long Island's our kind of bread and butter home market. How have you seen the market evolve since you started?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's my day-to-day it's changed night and day from when I first started. The Long Island market is historically primarily owner-occupied. So in the past, we used to, foot canvas and knock on doors, and typically the transactional flow was user to user, and then obviously your leases here and there. But the market has evolved in a way. It's becoming institutionalized. More national tenants are entering into the market. So it's been exciting over the past few years, to say the least. But it's definitely evolved and it's growing.
And is it fair to say that Long Island's been an attractive market because of the kind of mid to high incomes of the local population, where a lot of these industrial users, they want to tap into that buyer base, right? Is that a factor in it at all, or how would you look at that?
No, absolutely. So, from a demographic perspective, I mean, Nassau and Suffolk County alone has a population of plus or minus 3 million people. When you include the outer boroughs, it's close to 8 million, which would be the 13th largest state in the country. So it's a very dense area, like you mentioned. It's an affluent consumer base. So these companies, they want to get closer to the consumer, shorten that final mile, which has been a big trend and reason why we're seeing the activity that we have been, over the past 2-3 years.
Awesome. So let's take a step back from an investment perspective. Let's talk about existing product today. So let's say you own a Class B asset, in Comac, right? And you're trying to find the best way to add value to it. In multifamily, you can do the kitchen, you can do the bedrooms, you can redo a lot of things, right? Office, you can do the lobby. In industrial, the value add can be a little trickier, right? Because you're dealing with essentially a box and a few other, loading docks. So between the different aspects of a property, between, for example, raising the roof, redoing the parking lot, what do you find is the best way for owners today to add value to their existing buildings?
Yeah, so more often than not, the raising of the roof could certainly be one way to add value, but from a cost perspective and a return perspective, it doesn't necessarily pencil out. So a few things that landlords and owners do to add that value could be paving the lot, redoing the office space just to make it more appealing when you bring it to market, paint, carpet, lighting. And then, for the warehouse, just, installation of new LED lighting.
Okay, that makes sense. And as far as industrial outdoor storage, that's definitely a buzzword and kind of a hot topic today.
Absolutely.
What are you seeing with that component? I mean, Long Island, on the one hand, it's not Queens, right? But there's still demand for those outdoor storage guys. So what are you seeing out there today on Long Island?
No, there's definitely a demand for these iOS asset class, and we've worked on a few assignments recently, and there's a number of tenants that were expressing interest from building supply companies, equipment rental companies, storage of fleet. So what's interesting is most of the properties that may appear to have outdoor storage today on Long Island, it's not necessarily a conforming use. So to have a property that is zoned, and you're able to deliver a product, it's zoned, it's got the necessary improvements. The site is upgraded to 2023 town standards. That's the biggest thing at this point, which there's so few options. So when there is something available that you can deliver for a tenant, you're able to really push rents and drive rents up for these iOS properties. So it's been an exciting asset class, but it's definitely has its challenges as far from a zoning and use perspective.
Right. And how do the local townships on Long Island view that use? Are they generally amenable to it if it's not currently zoned that way? Do you see owners converting it to that use from something else, or what's the path you see there?
I think it's a case by case basis. Really depends what municipality that particular property may lie in. Is there surrounding residential? There has been one or two recent case studies where institutional investors have been able to get zoning from L1 to L2, but typically it's not an easy process to go through. And the biggest thing is really just bringing these properties up to code. So you're going to revise and amend a site plan, get a site plan approved in most cases, which could include installation of new dry wells, curbing, paving, fencing, landscaping, lighting. So it's definitely a process, but I think the towns are open to that conversation.
So when you're working with a tenant today looking to lease out, call it 20, 30,000 square feet of industrial space, what do you find to be the kind of key property attributes they're looking for? Is it a combination, I assume, ceiling height and loading? But if you had to kind of prioritize, what the most in-demand features are, what would you say?
So I would say it would be, ceiling height would probably be one of the big driving factors for tenants that are, actively looking in the market. Overall, functionality of the building itself, how much excess land or trailer spaces may be available for their, fleet of vans or trailers. And then obviously, dock positions does weigh into that decision as well.
Okay. That makes sense. And with regard to functionality, so obviously there's this new development on Long Island. There's kind of new product being out there. What would you say is the key differentiators between this kind of newer Class A stuff versus the existing Class B, Class C product on Long Island?
Right. So, it's definitely been, I think, a learning experience for the market as these, ground up new construction buildings are getting delivered. And, I think from a functionality standpoint, there's a number of incentives from an operations standpoint that are just very attractive for companies to improve overall functionality. And I think that the ceiling height, you get a 36-foot building, you're able to utilize that additional cubic square footage. So I think that's something that is being taken into consideration, even from the local occupiers as well. But in theory, you could, reduce the square footage that you lease. But if you have the cubic square footage to rack up, that obviously has a lot of incentives for some of these companies that are looking. And then, wide column spacing, new dock levelers. So,
and as far as, different use cases today, so for example, are you seeing demand today for cold storage, for, kind of cannabis use? What other, interesting kind of use cases are you seeing that may be different than what we've seen in the last few years?
Right. So, recently we've been, seeing and working on a number of food and beverage requirements. But the food distribution companies, it seems like there's a big demand right now in the market. And, they do have a component for freezer, cooler space. So cold storage, I think, is definitely something that we've been seeing a lot of tenants that are actively looking into in the market today. We're working on a few 3PL requirements. Food and beverage is a growing sector in our market, which incorporates the cold storage component that you just mentioned. Building materials, industrial supply companies. Seeing a lot of companies growing in our market right now. Infrastructure, construction companies, building out infrastructure for the utilities on Long Island. We're seeing, which has been pretty interesting. and some of the energy, EV battery companies that are looking to, lease up a piece of land. And
so let's hone in on the EV, because that's obviously an interesting trend. Obviously legislation and Congress is incentivizing battery storage, that type of thing. What are you seeing out there with regard to just the demand? What type of use, what type of properties? Is it just the land they're looking for? Like, what's the requirement for these EV guys?
Yeah, it's typically just the land for most of the requirements that we're seeing, and they need to be able to, bring in additional power, into the property. So being next to a grid or nearby a grid does have its bonuses. When these companies are looking, but most cases they are just looking for just a piece of land.
Got it. Okay.
And then on top of that, I mean, we're seeing obviously the retailers, big box retailers that also have active requirements, e-commerce companies. So there's a number of companies actively looking in the market. It's exciting. It's definitely a diverse tenant mix that we're seeing today.
Got it. And with those new big box retailers that are looking for space, how are they looking at Suffolk versus Nassau, right? Obviously, there's a lot of new development on the multifamily side, in Ronkonkoma with TriTech and all these other projects that are kind of being built further out east.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of path for growth where these users are following the multifamily development and they're seeing, hey, you have X number of more people living in these areas. Let's service those customers with a new last mile distribution center to kind of service that new population growth.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we're definitely seeing a migration of the tenants that are getting more comfortable being, further east in the market and being centrally located, as, opposed to in the past where a lot of companies wanted to be as close to, the boroughs as possible, or as close to the city as possible. But with, the developments that you just mentioned, the eastern end of Long Island, is growing, which is great for the market. As more population and consumers are going to be in that particular market, I do think, we'll continue to see a trend of companies and occupiers follow suit.
Right. And how would you distinguish between, the kind of central Suffolk market, for example, the Ronkonkoma area, versus the eastern Suffolk, for example, the Hamptons, a lot of migration post-COVID. I guess we'll find out how sticky that population growth is, that they end up, it's still kind of TBD if they're coming back, but a lot of people are obviously staying out there. So do you see a potential new demand for industrial products out there? I know Reckler has some projects there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that eastern Suffolk market that you're referring to, Medford, Yaphank, and East, it's definitely, a market that has been, I guess, leasing activity or absorption, historically, significantly less than where we've seen tenants and the demand as you go further west. But I do think that market, there is a lot of potential there. And I think we're seeing this trend of companies, willing to be further east out on Long Island. And to have a location, on the east end of Long Island will still give you the ability to service into, Nassau, Suffolk County, and into the outer boroughs, and obviously into the Hamptons as well. So I definitely think the projects that we're anticipating getting delivered, those developers will have success.
That makes sense. Let's go back to cold storage for a second, because it's interesting. It seems like a product type that has a lot of obvious demand, right? This new trend of people ordering on Instacart and whatever it is, still in short supply. It seems like a bit of a chicken and the egg, where because it's more expensive to develop these cold storage sites, right? I think a lot of developers might be a little reticent or hesitant to invest that money without the kind of surety of the demand. Meanwhile, you have, the existing users and tenants who are looking for that space. So how do you see that kind of cold storage supply demand dynamic playing out?
Right. So, I mean, our market, I believe we only have one, maybe two cold storage facilities that are available for tenants that are looking for space for their inventory. And I think from, like you mentioned, a cost perspective and, the amount that it takes to build out that infrastructure, coupled with the fact that, we only have, very few data points, to share with potential cold storage developers. And nobody really wants to be the first to come into the market and do it. But nonetheless, I do think that when the time comes that we do see a spec development, a cold storage spec development, I'm excited to see the results. I definitely think that there's a big demand right now from the food users, medical, pharmaceutical. So I think it's definitely an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of those things where like whoever's brave enough to be that first one
Exactly.
is going to actually make a killing on it. But it takes a lot of guts to be that
Oh yeah,
that first one. As far as retrofitting existing spaces to cold storage, I don't want to overemphasize it, but it's an interesting field, I think. Have you seen that at all? Of owners taking their existing product and putting that capex to allow for cold storage, or not so much?
Not so much, and I think there's a number of challenges to retrofit an existing building. You need the slabs to be a certain thickness, so you have to potentially rip up the slab. The ceiling height, the cold storage users, the higher the better. In some cases, we've had users ask if they can build up to 60 feet high.
Oh wow!
So I think the best play would be to find a piece of industrial land and build on spec.
Got it. And as far as the cannabis world, I think there was a big transaction a couple of years ago in Riverhead that kind of hit the wires. But more recently, you haven't heard as much on the cannabis side, but legalization is coming on Long Island, and they're already awarding licenses, and certain towns are already allowing the sale. Are you seeing any demand for the cannabis growers? And actually, more than that, it's interesting is whether it's going to, obviously retail sales are going to be coming to Long Island, but the question is, are they going to be growing on Long Island, or is that going to be growing in cheaper areas like upstate New York or whatever it is, right? Have you seen anything as a tell there, or not yet?
Other than a few calls, from companies looking for warehouse space, I personally haven't been working on any of those types of requirements, but I do think that will be something that we see more and more. And I do feel like the companies will probably be growing, out east on Long Island, as opposed to try to service it from, outside of the market.
Right. Okay. As far as South Shore Long Island, so, anything from Valley Stream, Hewlett, Lawrence, Inwood, there's mostly residential areas. I'm curious what you're seeing out there. Freeport has some product out there, right? But why do you think that is, that there isn't as much development down there? Or, to the extent that, is there an opportunity there for growth in that area for industrial product, or is it really just well serviced by the existing kind of arteries through Long Island today?
No, I mean, I think there's definitely a lack of inventory from that, the five towns area, Hewlett, Inwood, all the way east to Freeport, Belmore, Massapequa. Really lack of industrial product, and it's very land constraint, like most of Long Island, but especially Nassau County. So I think developing in that South Shore area, there's going to be few and far between from an opportunity perspective to do so. But if somebody can find an opportunity that they are able to build, I think that would be very successful, just due to the limited inventory and lack of supply.
We saw an interesting trend the last couple of years of converting office buildings to industrial, obviously. And I think that's close to maxed out, if not already maxed out on Long Island. And that could certainly change as office values potentially, see how they shake out next couple of years. Are you seeing any other interesting industrial conversion opportunities out there for investors, or is it really mainly that office industrial conversion?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a number of office to industrial conversions. We've seen existing, Class C type warehouses, also get converted and redeveloped into, modern Class A facilities as well. But, besides that, I don't think we're going to see medical buildings, getting redeveloped or anything like that. So there's definitely a big trend in, those office to industrial conversions. And, if there's an opportunity available for, an owner to do so, or developer to do so, I think we'll continue to see that trend. But like you mentioned, options are certainly dwindling at this point.
So if you had to kind of put your finger on why all these institutional investors are entering the Long Island marketplace, you have some of the largest funds out there, from the Brookfields of the world to the Link Logistics. What's making Long Island so appealing for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the overall market fundamentals. I mean, we touched on the demographics. It's it's your ideal infill location, densely populated. It's an affluent region, and our market is definitely undersupplied. When you're comparing it to, let's say, northern New Jersey, for example, our market has 31 square feet of industrial product per consumer, compared to northern New Jersey that has 83 square feet.
Oh, wow. That is a huge delta.
Right. So there's definitely room to grow, in that perspective. And then for these spec developments that I think since 2015, we've seen 12 new buildings get delivered. And now, there's a number of projects that we're tracking over the next, several years that we anticipate getting delivered to the market. And I think the biggest thing for that is just, our existing inventory. The average age of these buildings is 50 years old. So these buildings are, functionally obsolete, low ceiling heights, and that's the bulk of our inventory. There's 18 buildings in our market that have ceiling heights with 36-foot clear plus. So as we're seeing the market evolve and we're seeing these, regional and national occupiers looking to enter into Long Island, those are the types of buildings that they occupy in other regions throughout the country. So we're seeing really a flight to quality for these new developments, and I think it's part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of institutional capital looking to invest in Long Island. So it's in the earlier stages of our growth pattern, but we're definitely seeing the tenant demand right now. The vacancy rate is below 3%, and we're seeing significant increase in rents as well.
And as far as your predictions for the next kind of couple of years, won't hold you to this, but if you had to guess, kind of like either areas of Long Island that you're a big believer in that you think are kind of poised for growth, right? Or interesting kind of use cases that you think are like there's early signs up today that are going to only expand, right? What do you kind of see coming down the pike?
So I'm extremely bullish on the Long Island industrial market. I think the fundamentals for our market are extremely strong. We're in the relatively early stages of what I feel like is going to be a growing market over the next several years. But vacancy rate under 3%. Last year we saw leasing activity was up by 67% year over year, and we saw rents increase by 27% year over year. So as we talked about the market evolving earlier, we're seeing more and more of these regional and national occupiers that are entering into the market that historically, were servicing Long Island from their distribution centers in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. And they didn't necessarily have to have locations here. But as the consumer behavior has changed over time, and companies are, getting smarter in some cases with their supply chain resilience, they're shortening that final mile. They're entering into the Long Island market. They're getting closer to the consumer. So I think we're going to continue to see a trend of a lot of these national occupiers that may not be here today, but will be here, in years to come.
Interesting. And those occupiers you're talking about, I assume they already exist in places like, New Jersey New Jersey's a kind of big one. They have the port there.
Yeah.
But what do you think it's going to take for a lot of these guys to say, hey, we haven't been in Long Island yet. We're in Jersey now. Let's start expansion into the Long Island market, right? What's been that kind of, not hesitation, but how do you get from point A to point B?
Well, I think it's just, that consumer behavior evolving, being on your phone and, everybody ordering everything online now. And I think the cost savings that these companies, realize they'll have entering into Long Island as opposed to, continuing to service it from outside the market is significant. The transportation and cost to deliver these goods is expensive. I believe the transportation cost accounts for, I believe it's like 50 to 70% of a company's overhead, and the real estate itself is like 5 to 8%. So to have a facility here, really makes sense for a lot of these companies. And I think over time, we've seen recently companies come to that realization, and definitely foresee that trend continuing. And our market differentiates from the New Jersey market, that we don't necessarily have tenants that are looking for 500,000 square feet or 1 million square feet. But our sweet spot, especially with the national and regional occupiers, is really in that like 40 to 120,000 square feet.
Yeah. And as far as the buyer base from, Brooklyn and Queens, for years, it's been a really great for Long Island that, if you do the math, some of these owners were, for example, Long Island City, they sold a property, industrial property, for some ridiculous price to a multifamily developer, took that money and moved out east to Long Island, pushed up pricing here. It was great for all the incumbent landlords. Are you still seeing that trend today? Are you seeing a slowdown there? And kind of what's that demand and appetite looking like from west to east?
Yep. So we definitely saw that trend that we're referring to with the, residential developments and a lot of occupiers. It was probably 5-6 years ago that we saw a big demand from tenants that were migrating east. There was definitely a slowdown, I'd say over the last 2 years or so. But in recent months, there's been, it seems like that's starting to pick up again. So we're seeing more users that are looking to, whether it's buy or lease. But I think there's, from the leasing perspective too, I mean, the tenants in Brooklyn and Queens are paying, in some cases in the, low to mid 20s, for an existing, functionally obsolete warehouse. And, you could lease a warehouse in, Nassau and Suffolk for a fraction of the price and still service your customers.
Right. And to your earlier point, because it's a no-brainer when you look at it from that perspective. But for a lot of those users, if their client base is in the city or Queens, the transportation costs can really start to add up. So is that really what's offsetting, them just gobbling up more on Long Island? It's just the fact that if you are servicing the city, it's just more expensive to just transport, right?
Yes. Correct. So it's definitely a case by case basis. It depends where the bulk of your customers are. And yes, if you are servicing, in that immediate area in the outer boroughs and into the city, those types of users are probably going to look to stay there. But, again, in some cases, that's not the only area that these tenants and occupiers have a consumer base. And I think those are tenants that are willing to go east.
Right. Makes sense. And, as we've seen China reopening at a macro level, have you actually seen, not a one-to-one correlation, but some type of correlation there between, what's happening across the world versus the actual activity on the ground level on Long Island? Or is it really not that correlated at all?
No, I think there's definitely the synergies with everything that happens, with our economy to what we do, whether it's, the other countries, what's happening with the financial market right now. It all intertwines with our business. So we're definitely seeing a correlation, and we're seeing more of companies and tenants that may have ties to other countries that have active requirements at this point. So I definitely see the correlation.
Right, and what Tom's referring to, we're recording this in mid-March 23, in the aftermath of the Signature Bank going belly up. It's obviously a dynamic situation, a lot of noise out there, but, I think we all agree here that Long Island Industrial is here to stay and one of the safest long-term investments and plays out there right now. So, we'll see how that financial systemic issues shake out for sure. From a client perspective, the Cushman brand's obviously very powerful. You have an international network, but even the national or even local network is fairly strong, right? You have offices in the city, in Queens, and Long Island. How did those synergies work, between Queens, for example, and Long Island? how are you benefiting from that? And how does that trickle down to the ultimate client who's looking to maximize pricing?
Right. So, I mean, from a local standpoint, we've started to, do a lot of business with our New Jersey office and our team in Brooklyn and Queens, and collaborating more and more to form that regional approach and understand what's happening in other markets, what they're seeing, boots on the ground, and just using each other as a resource has been extremely helpful. To have the Cushman brand and offices in every major market in the world has been a big tool, for myself and obviously clients. But to be able to get market information, any market that you may need, it's definitely helpful, to have that brand behind you, and utilize Cushman and Wakefield.
Okay, makes sense. If you were to start all over again today, just so everyone knows, Tom is a rising star in the industry. He's actually won a number of awards. So congrats on that, Tom.
Thank you.
If you were to start all over again, though, would you do anything different? It's always something that you could kind of come up with, even though your star is definitely rising. What would you do differently today?
Honestly, it's hard to say I do anything different at this point. I'll actually, June 1st, will be 8 years at Cushman and Wakefield. Thank you. And I think just, seeing over time, the growth in the market is correlated with my career as well. But I don't think that I would change a thing. I mean, like I mentioned, I've had Frank Frizzalone has been my mentor in the business and could not have done any of this without him. Nick Gallipoli's has been a partner of mine since I joined Cushman and Wakefield as well. And it's really just it's a learning experience. It's got its good days and its bad days, but you just need to put in the work and the time, and everything comes to fruition. But somebody actually used an example that it's like going for a master's degree, because it takes those years to really get yourself situated in this business, learning the market, and building a clientele. So I wouldn't change a thing.
Awesome. Yeah. Shout out to Frank and Nick and your whole team there. You've had only positive experiences working with you guys.
Thank you.
So, along those same lines, if you were a young guy coming out of school today, let's say coming out of Hofstra, and you want to get in the real estate business, how would you, go about that? Like, would you suggest, starting at a smaller brokerage, going straight to a larger brokerage? Is there kind of a path that you would suggest a young guy or young girl looking to get started in this industry?
Look, I think there's pros and cons of, being at any firm, whether it's a larger firm or a smaller firm. But, from my perspective, I think you get yourself with a good company, a good firm, and the right team. I think is really important to have that mentorship, when you first get into the business, and just dedicate your time to learn. You have to learn the market, and it's not gonna be easy. It's not gonna happen overnight, and you have to have thick skin,
Right.
like But it could definitely be a great business. You just have to put in that time, put in the effort, and it has its perks.
And from the investor side, out of curiosity, leaving aside the institutional investors, the mom and pop kind of entrepreneurial investors you've worked with over the years, have you seen a consistent set of qualities, personality traits, skill set among those guys and girls who have kind of risen through the ranks and become successful in this industry?
Right. So listen, I think the successful clients and investors that I've worked with, I think just, persistence, following up, wanting to, hear what, we're seeing, boots on the ground on a daily basis, what, deals we may be working on, whether it's from the leasing side of it, or what we may have available, for them to look at from a sales perspective. And then just getting a quick turnaround, I think is something that, is important as well. Not, sharing something and then not getting any type of feedback at all. So just, communication, I think is important.
Right. I know that, brokers love quick feedback, right? That's
in some cases.
Yeah, don't make you guys wait. Just give you an answer the same day.
No.
Anything else you want to leave the listeners with for today?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot. Like we've been mentioning, just there's a lot of change going on in the Long Island market, and it's been exciting. But it's just from a growing market, it's definitely exciting to see real time.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom, for coming in, and see you next week.